Hey everybody, thanks for joining me on another episode and another video. I'm the psychology student. Today we're going to talk about what is a depressive disorder. So I'm going to be essentially doing what I always do. Pay the big bucks for the tuition, read through those dense textbooks, attend the lectures, strip away all the fat, and give you what you need to know about depressive disorders. Now when we talk about depression, this is something that we hear in many different facets and in different forms. Someone says, I'm depressed. Someone says, so-and-so is experiencing depressive symptoms. And another person is diagnosed to have major depressive disorder. What's the difference between the three? What are the three most common types of depression? What is depression even? So what I'm going to do today is we're going to go through a very breadth-focused video, meaning it's going to be more on the shallow aspect, but we're going to cover all the different types of depressive disorders. Just give you a bit of a taste test. This way, if you're interested in a specific one, you can go on and do your own research. As always, this is only for educational purposes. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm simply a psychology student who wants to share the things that I learn, that I read about with the greater audience, all right? So we're going to talk about the three most common depressive disorders. We're also going to talk about things like prevalence, interesting stats and facts, things that stood out to me that I hope will also stand out to you. So why are we talking about depression? Check this out. This is from a textbook which has a compilation of peer-reviewed articles. This was a quote taken from who? The World Health Organization. By 2030, depression is projected to be the #1 cause of disability in the world. Disability. Now, when you think about disability, what do you think of? An injury. You think of a physical injury, not a mental health one. So having a curiosity and burnout and things such as employers putting too much work on employees' plates, I'm very interested to see how that's going to impact it. So here's what's important to note. Whenever you think about depression, what comes to mind? Like, what is the feeling? What is the idea? What do you think about? In one sense, many young people who experience depression, they're going to express feelings of sadness, of hopelessness, of loss. By the way, if you love topics about depression, definitely check out one of my earlier videos. It was called I Feel Hopeless. It's going to cover some of the similar things. So a lot of them are characterized by this feeling of sadness. However, and here's the first kind of myth that we're going to break down, not everyone who's suffering from depression is going to be sad. Another big characteristic of depression is irritable mood, like being really tense, being really frustrated easily, having high level of annoyance. So you can have two people who are both suffering from depression. One is extremely sad and not angry. The other one isn't sad, but they're very irritable, okay? So what we want to demonstrate is that depression can come in many different forms, and it can look differently based on different people and their own characteristics. So here's a question that I want to talk about, or not a question, but this kind of this idea that we have in society, okay? So we tend to think about young people as positive and upbeat and optimistic and full of energy when, in fact, there's a lot of young people that are depressed, that are experiencing depressive symptoms. Now, what happens when a young person opens up about their depression to maybe an adult? It's one of my favorite reactions ever. Ready? Here we go. You tell me if you've ever heard this one before. This kid or this child or this young adult opens up to an adult, and the adult says, "What do you possibly have to be depressed about? You're 16. You don't have kids and a family. You don't pay taxes. What do you have to be depressed about? You should be happy." How about when that kid is 14? How about when that kid is 12? Right? So we have this kind of stereotype in our mind that the best time of your life is between 10 to 23. So when a young person looks at you and says, "I'm not doing well," we go, I don't understand. Did something traumatic happen? Did you come back from war? No? Okay. Did your father die? Well then, what possible reason could you have to not feel great? So one of the easiest ways to kind of understand that what someone is going through maybe isn't sadness, but it's more heavily connected with something more serious like depression is the ability to bounce back. So oftentimes in kids, what we see is if they feel upset because of a bad day at school, because someone said something to them, their ability to bounce back is rather quick. It can be a couple of minutes, if not a couple of hours, and they're back to it. But someone who's depressed, it'll take them far longer to bounce back, to start feeling good again. Here's another stat that doesn't sound good to hear, but it's important that you do. Almost all young people experience symptoms of depression, and many experience significant depression at some time. So think about all the young people in your life, okay? Now, young people could mean anything from... Actually, let me Google it just to make sure I don't give you the wrong definition. Because my immediate thought goes to young adulthood. Is that what you mean? Okay, so the United Nations states between 15 to 24 years old. That's what I was thinking. So most of these people between the ages of 15 and 24 will experience symptoms of depression. Most. Not some, not half, most of them. Right? A symptom of depression, which is, it's actually quite common. Like, that's actually what I've seen in other bits of literature too. So later on, when we talk about some of the different symptoms of depression, you can see, let's say if there's 8 depressive symptoms for this disorder, it's pretty common for people to experience like 2 out of the 8 symptoms. It doesn't mean you can be diagnosed as clinically depressed, but it shows that if you keep going downhill and then you pick up 3, 4, 5, it can get dangerous. Yeah. Here's a... Let me think about it. I don't want to throw too much on you. Okay, here's an important thing to clarify. Is, as I was just saying earlier, we have disorders, right? And we also have symptoms. So essentially what a disorder is, it's a bunch of symptoms that are happening at the same time. A symptom is one thing. Like, you have a single symptom. Like, you get a common cold. Like, what's a symptom? Maybe it's a runny nose. Maybe it's a sore throat, right? And what happens is when you go to any professional, medical professional, mental health professional, when you start displaying a certain amount of symptoms in a pattern, they go, oh, we've noticed that these 3 or 4 symptoms are really common, so we're going to call this blank, depression. We're going to call this OCD. We're going to call this anxiety. Otherwise, it would just be a little hard to understand things and understand what people have. So whenever we're talking about a disorder, essentially it is a bunch of symptoms that are happening at the same time. Now, here are the 3 most common forms of depression. Ready for it? There's 3. Right before I give you this, let me just put an outline up here because I want to make this easier to conceptualize. And if this video gets really long, maybe we'll make a part 1 and part 2. So, whenever you hear depression, I want you to think about mood. Depression, mood. Mood, depression. Why? Because depression, we're talking about a mood disorder. It's when your mood is fluctuating abnormally. Okay, so maybe you're feeling upset for an extremely long period of time. Maybe you're feeling irritable for an extremely long period of time. Maybe it's taking you longer to bounce back. So I want you to imagine at the top, you've got the word mood disorders, okay? Disorders that are associated with your mood. And then you've got these 2 branches. And on one side, you're going to have depressive disorders. And on the other side, you're going to have bipolar disorders, right? So right now, we're talking about mood disorders. We're talking about the branch of depressive disorders. And we're going to start talking about 3 disorders that are under that kind of depression branch. Everybody following me right now? If any of this you want more on research, please Google this stuff, look it up. There's a ton of information on it. So the first and most common form of depression, this disorder is called major depressive disorder. Okay? So major depressive disorder, you have to have all these symptoms for at least a minimum of 2 weeks. This is associated with being sad, like unbelievably upset, irritable, a loss of interest or pleasure in the things that you used to love, disturbances in sleep, difficulty concentrating, feelings of worthlessness. So when we think about depressive disorders, a lot of these symptoms are going to sound similar, and there's a few things that I'm going to highlight which can help you differentiate them. Mind you, as I'm going through this is just for educational purposes. If you hear me say one of the symptoms of depression is fatigue, and you go, oh my God, I feel tired, does that mean I have depression? Please don't freak yourself out. What oftentimes happens is a symptom can be a sign of a plethora of different things. You could be fatigued because you drink too much caffeine, because you don't drink enough caffeine, because you don't have enough protein in your diet, because you don't exercise enough so it makes you feel lethargic, because your sleep cycle has been off. So just because you show one or two symptoms does not mean that we can start to self-diagnose ourselves, okay? So whatever I say, please take with a grain of salt. So the really big ones that I want you to think about, symptoms for this one are, you could feel fatigue, you could feel tired, you could feel sadness, you could feel high irritability, you can have a loss of interest in the things that used to make you happy. And that's a really tough one. Sarah used to love dancing 3 times a week. Now she goes and dances and it doesn't make her feel good anymore, and she doesn't have any motivation to do it. Bill loved to design websites, but now he doesn't anymore. Like it's gone. He doesn't get that same serotonin release that he used to. Okay? So those are really big ones when you think about depression. Major depressive disorder. The second one is called, don't worry, we're going to go in depth into these a little bit later on. The second one is called persistent depressive disorder. Now, this one is very similar to the last one. The biggest way that it differs is that the symptoms are typically less severe, but they're longer lasting. So if you're talking about being really upset or being really irritable, you can still have both of those, but the way that they differ from major depressive disorder is persistent depressive disorder. You're going to be upset. Let's say if 10 is, I want to cry my eyes out. 1 is, I feel happy. If major depressive disorder makes you feel sad where you're like a 10 or a 9, persistent depressive disorder might make you feel like a 7. The only difference is this one can last a whole lot longer. So the period that it takes for you to bounce back from feeling this way is extremely long, and it's quite longer than major depressive disorders. All right? So major depressive disorder was at least for a minimum of 2 weeks. That was what you have to have the symptoms every day for a minimum of 2 weeks. Persistent depressive disorder can go on much longer, even up to a year, if not longer than a year, before bouncing back. And bouncing back, I don't mean fully recovered. Bouncing back just means you feel a little bit better before you feel terrible again. The last one is called disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. This one is characterized hugely by frequent and severe temper outbursts due to regular situation. So someone cuts you off in traffic and you notice your reaction is far greater than what, let's say, a quote-unquote normal person or what a normal reaction would be. And it's also characterized by chronic, persistent irritability or angry mood. So whenever we're talking about depression and someone is focusing in on angry mood, my first thing is thinking, okay, if anger is the number one thing that you're showing, and it's one of the only things, could it be disruptive mood dysregulation? If you're telling me, look, I've got a series of depression, of these different symptoms, irritable mood, and I also feel tired and I feel sad, it's not been terrible, but I haven't felt good in 8-9 months. Maybe I'm leaning towards persistent depressive disorder. And obviously, if it's a little more general, if it's all those things, if it's been a minimum of 2 weeks, but again, we're not counselors, we're not psychologists, we do not diagnose, we just put the information out there for people to become more aware. So I know I threw all that stuff at you. This isn't one of those videos where you're going to become an expert at all the disorders, but I want to open up the door in a kind of taste test sense where you can go to Google and you can start looking up these things for yourself, all right? So what is major depressive disorder? What is persistent depressive disorder? What is mood dysregulation disorder? Here's another sad and unfortunate stat to hear, is that 60% of adolescents with MDD, so adolescence is referring to young people, kind of, I think, teenager years, right? We're talking like 11, 12, up until about 17. So 60% of them with major depressive disorder, they have a huge chance of having a comorbid personality disorder, meaning comorbidity just means a bunch of disorders together. So you could have major depressive disorder, you could have borderline personality disorder, you could have another disorder, and that makes treatment for that stuff even trickier. What I find unfortunate during this stuff is I'm so excited to talk to everybody. I'm so enthusiastic and so energetic, and yet the stuff that I always present is pretty bumming people out. So if whenever you have to take a break from this video, go out for a walk, take a breath of fresh air, listen to some music, please do that. Otherwise, continue this sad, gloomy talk with me. Let me read this to you. So, although most people will recover from their depressive bouts, unfortunately, relapse is extremely high. And this is something I talked about in the I Feel Hopeless video, is if you've suffered from major depressive disorder, right? If you were diagnosed with it, the chances that you experience the symptoms again in the next 5 years is 70%. So what we're beginning to realize is that depressive disorders are a lifelong disorder. This idea of, I beat my depression when I was 17, it's very rare. And if you're one of those people who was diagnosed with depression, with a form of depressive disorder, you overcame it, you're one of the lucky ones. What happens to most people is the symptoms get a lot better with treatment, and I'll talk about what the most common treatments are. And then after a while, they'll have a couple of years where the depressive symptoms will be low. And then at the first sight of something going wrong, it could be failing a test, it could be a partner breaking up with them, it could be something happens in their life, it triggers those symptoms again, and they begin to relapse with their behavior. I also talked about this earlier in the I Feel Hopeless video, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. It's this idea of, look, if you suffer from a depressive disorder once, and this is called stress sensitization, the chances that this will reoccur will increase. Why? Because it sensitizes you. It sensitizes your nervous system. So that next time if a stressor happens, next time if something terrible happens, you're actually a little bit weaker to deal with it. Here's a quote of a mother of a depressed teen who talks about what it's been like for her to have a child who suffers from depression. And I quote, "Depression in kids, when it hits them in their teens, leaves a hole in their lives. When they're young and just starting out in life, they're supposed to become independent. But that doesn't happen with depressed kids. They're out of sync and get left behind, and they never really catch up. That leaves a permanent scar." End quote. So we can understand how these things are actually like a lifelong battle that people have, and they're mostly misunderstood. So we spoke about young people, we spoke about adolescents. Let's talk about gender for a second. So there's a double standard when it comes to gender and depression, meaning depression is far higher in girls than it is in boys. Like far higher. And I want to talk about this graph that I'm looking at right now. So depressive symptoms in boys and girls is quite close at the age of 11, even close at the age of 13. At the age of 15 is where we start to see the gap start to increase, where the risk of depression for girls starts to increase. And it becomes double. At the age of 18, it increases even more at a drastic rate. And at 21, it increases by a little bit more. So, the likeliness of someone having depression, of a girl having depression when compared to a guy, is a lot more. Like, a lot. Now, you're thinking, Dana, why is this? Why is this the case? Why are girls more likely to suffer from depression than guys? There could be a variety of reasons. One of the things that individuals are going to point to is genetics, is neurobiology, just the way that their brain is set up. I'm trying to see if there's anything else in here notes-wise that are really important for you to hear. Yep. Yep, hormonal changes in estrogen, testosterone may affect brain functioning, may affect sexual maturity, expectations, heightened exposure to stressful events, puberty. These things will impact an individual's self-worth, which can lead to depressed mood and evoke self-focused attention. So check this out. Depression in pre-adolescent children is equally common in both boys and girls, okay? But the ratio of girls to boys is about 2 to 1, okay? So for every one boy that has depression, 2 girls have depression. And after puberty, that stat changes to 3 to 1. So for every one boy who has depression, there'll be 3 girls who have depression. So that is just a little bit looking into some of these different ideas and the differences in adolescence and young people, in gender. Now, as I'm talking about this stuff, I want you to think about the things that are interesting to you, the things that stick out to you, and really the purpose of these videos is to have these things that will spark your curiosity so that you go do your own research, so that you go watch a YouTube video just on major depressive disorder, just on persistent depressive disorder, and see, what is it about these that are interesting? What is it about these that characterize them themselves? For your own research, obviously. All right, so we've talked about depression. We've talked about the different aspects of depression. We've talked about the 3 different disorders: major, persistent, and mood dysregulation. Here's an interesting bit I also want to talk to you about. So here's an interesting model of self-esteem and depression, which says we have different areas of our life that are important to us: school, work, relationships, volunteering. When we place a high level of value in that area and we get negative feedback, it decreases our self-esteem and it increases depressive symptoms. Meaning, you're an A student, you put a lot of value in your schoolwork. All of a sudden, you have a bad semester for whatever reason. The repeated negative feedback of you're not good enough, this test wasn't good enough, your prof isn't happy with you, is going to decrease your self-esteem and simultaneously increase your depressive symptoms. Now, why this is different for some people is, if I don't care about school as much as you do, when you get a bad grade, or when we both get a bad grade, it's going to hurt you a lot more because you place a lot more value on school than I would. All right? So it's important to kind of understand how that can also lead to it. Let's see. Here's another thing to be careful of. Another huge depressive risk is rumination. So rumination or dwelling is this idea when you're sitting there and you're just thinking about negative thoughts over and over again. It's like a negative thought loop. Why does my life suck? I feel terrible. I can't get anything done. Nobody likes me. I don't even like myself. My life's going to stay like this in the future. And thinking like that negatively increases your risk for depression. So guess what co-rumination is? Is when you do that with someone. Now, here's what's interesting. When you co-ruminate with somebody, you increase the chances of depression for both parties. So one thing that is common is girl A reaches out to her best friend girl B, and they start co-ruminating. My life sucks. My life sucks. My boss sucks. My homework sucks. And they just keep on going. And the worry thing, the people that are worried about that the media doesn't pick up on is, why can't boys be more like girls? If men talked about their problems more often, they would feel a lot better. Be careful. What does talking mean? Because right now, there's some literature to suggest that if by talking you mean ruminating, you mean dwelling on our problems, it actually increases the chance of depressive symptoms. When we say talking to someone makes you feel better, you got to be careful because talking is ambiguous. What do you mean, complaining? There's this kind of fine line where you got to be able to complain a little. You got to have someone who's an active listener. You got to have someone who empathizes with you. You got to be able to accept your emotions. You've got to be able to start looking forward and to start challenging those thoughts and those beliefs. Well, what makes you think your life sucks? And then a person goes, well, look, my life doesn't really suck. I just feel a little bit grumpy. That's why it appears like bad things are a whole lot worse than they actually are. Like, thoughts like that, you can really easily go from ruminating to a positive, uplifting conversation. And the problem is people hear this stuff and they go, oh, what Daniel's saying, I have to silver line everything. So when my friend says, I got into a car crash, I'm going to respond with, well, at least you didn't get hurt. Now, if you've been a follower of mine for some time, you know how much I dislike that, right? When your friend says, my girlfriend cheated on me, you shouldn't say, well, at least you didn't have an affair. It doesn't actually make someone feel better. So now you're sitting there and you're going, well, Daniel, I don't know what to do. You just said complaining makes them feel worse. You said I shouldn't talk about the positive. What the heck, man? What do you want me to do? Friends, I've spent thousands of dollars since 2018, but even prior, on my own, studying this exact thing. I am getting a degree in brains. I'm getting a degree in talking. I'm almost finished with this degree, and I haven't even scratched, I don't even know. The amount of information that I know is so little, is so minuscule, that I sit there and think, where did all my money go? Where did the last 5 years of my life go? This is why we have people who have PhDs in brains, who have PhDs in neurobiology, in psychology, in psychiatry. Because it is so complex that it takes years to understand a lot of these different mechanisms, how the brain works the way it does, how to talk to people, and we still don't know everything. There's still parts of the brain that we don't know what they do. So it's important to be patient. It's important to be open to understanding and learning new things. Now, I'm thinking, do I include it in this video or do we do it in another one? Okay, I'll do it, and this is going to be the last thing that I want to talk about because I don't want to go information overload where I put too much on you. All right, you know what? This is what we'll do. We're going to make a part 1 and a part 2 because I want you to hear all this. It's really interesting information. It's really, really important. But I also understand that having all this is a lot to have on your plate. You know what? Screw it. We'll just make one long one. Because I care about you and I want you to get the information now. Okay? Up next, we're going to talk about depression and suicide. So, here's what I want you to think about. If I said someone tried to commit suicide, what do you think about? Like, who is this person in your head? If I say, close your eyes and think about someone who tried to commit suicide, what do they look like? How old are they? What's their gender? You might first think, well, Daniel, maybe I think of a guy. I think of a 50-year-old man whose wife just left him. Okay. What if I tell you it's a girl? What if I tell you it's a 12-year-old girl? When we have the discussion about what do you possibly have to be depressed about, and then I tell you that a 12-year-old girl attempted to take her own life. And you're sitting there, you're going, Daniel, 12? 12 years old? Yeah. With her mom's pills, taking her mom's medication. About 60% of youth who are clinically depressed report having thoughts about suicide, and 30% attempt suicide by 17 years of age. If you have 100 people, more than half of them are going to think about committing suicide. 30% of them actually will attempt to do so. And this is before the age of 17. So you tell me, Mr. You have nothing to be depressed about. You tell me, Mr. 14 to 22 is the happiest time of your life. Why do 60% of people, of young kids who are depressed, think about killing themselves, and 30% actually attempt to do it? I want to share with you a note from a young girl, and this is one of her thoughts. So check this out. Depressive disorder and suicide attempts. These were her thoughts that she'd written down. I look around here and all I see, it's a world, it's a school that could do without me. I've gotten here, but only by fate. My death, I'm sure, will not come late. I try each day to see the use of being here. There is none. I try to find a meaning, but the wars have been fought. My battle is yet to come. When I close my eyes, the pain goes. When I open them again, it shows. I try not to cry out loud. Wouldn't matter anyway, I'm lost in this crowd. You can pretend I don't live, but I'll keep living till my life gives. That was a note written by a 15-year-old girl. So here's what's terrifying about this. What is the cure for suicide ideation, for thinking about taking your own life? The sad thing, folks, is there isn't one. There is no treatment for suicide ideation. There is no medication for suicide ideation. You're listening to this, you go, wait a minute, Daniel, this doesn't sound right. I've seen the movies, I've seen the TV shows. A person tells a counselor, I think this is a Bill Burr joke or Dave Chappelle joke. You're sitting there going, I have thoughts of suicide. The counselor presses the big red button, and then like security comes and grabs you, right? And they put you in the straitjacket. Here's what actually happens. We don't know what can cure suicide ideation. We simply don't. Here's what we do know. The individuals who think about suicide, I really want to make sure I get this right here for you folks. Right. Look, the individuals who think about suicide and who attempt suicide, the overwhelming majority of them are suffering from depressive symptoms. Okay? So what this tells us is, look, we don't have a cure for suicide ideation, but we do have a lot of treatment for depression. And if almost everybody who's committing suicide has depressive symptoms, what if we can target the depressive symptoms? If we can make the depressive symptoms go away, the cases of someone who's thinking about suicide or who's attempted suicide who has zero depressive symptoms is extremely rare. It's almost non-existent. So we go, well, look, that doesn't exist, right? If you want to take your own life, you have to be suffering from depressive symptoms. So what if we could treat your depressive symptoms? What if we made the depressive symptoms go away, and thus you wouldn't be in this negative thoughts with the negative feelings, and thus you'd be less likely to think about suicide, less likely to attempt it, and less likely to be successful at it. So that's what we've done. When we think about suicide ideation, the majority of the time they're also suffering from depressive symptoms, so we focus on the depressive symptoms. And we attack that forefront with medication and with treatment. Here's a stat about the US. Suicide is especially worrisome as it is the second leading cause of death among young adolescents and young adults in the United States. So it's huge, folks. It's absolutely huge. So again, if we're thinking about suicide ideation, most likely they're suffering from depressive symptoms. In that case, we want to gear our medication and our treatment towards their depressive symptoms. Because our hope is our hypothesis currently in the literature is that there's a positive correlation. Meaning, as one decreases, so does the other. And if we can lower your depressive symptoms, hopefully your suicide ideation will also lower. So, now with that out of the way, we're going to talk about some different theories of depression. So there's a bunch of different theories, and again, I'm really just going to run through them because you could do a whole video on each theory in and of itself, okay? But whenever, folks, there's a bunch of theories for something, you should know that it's not perfect. If one of the theories was perfect, it would mean that you would only need one. There's no need for 10 theories if there's one perfect one. So, here's a couple of different theories about how depression happens, and I want to read some of the more common ones to you, okay? And then, as always, this is meant for you to push you, to guide you to do your own research. So here's one theory on depression. This is called psychodynamic. So it's based on actual or symbolic loss of love object, like a caregiver. Anger toward love object turned inward, and excessive severity of the superego, loss of self-esteem. So it's like you love your mother, and when your mother passes away, you turn that anger inside. And you've got that anger because you don't have her to talk to anymore, you don't have her to depend on anymore, and because of that anger, it's turned inwards. Why don't I have anybody? I feel terrible, and it's frustration, and it's almost annoyance. And it leads to a loss of self-esteem. So that's the psychodynamic theory. Another one is called attachment theory. So attachment theory looks at insecure early attachments and distorted internal working models of self and others. So attachment theory says, look, as a baby, you have a poor attachment with your caregivers, with your parents, where what they teach you directly or indirectly is that other people cannot be trusted. Other people mean to harm you. You should never be vulnerable because vulnerable people get hurt. So you close yourself up. You never get intimate. You end up being alone, and that leads to the development of depression. We're going to talk about 3 more. There is behavior theory. Behavior theory says, look, it's a lack or a loss of reinforcement or quality of reinforcement. And there's deficits and skills needed to obtain reinforcement. So behavioral theory all looks at this. Look, if I go exercise or I do something right, how do I know if it's something right or not? If I do something and I like the consequences, I like the aftermath, I will do it again. If you work out and you feel good, there's going to be a greater chance that you work out again. If you touch a hot stove and it burns you, you are less likely to engage in that thing. So what behavioral theorists, one of the fundamental ideas is that it's a matter of positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. If at home, everything you do, your parents shout at you, and they tell you you're not good enough, that's just constant negative reinforcement. You're not good enough. You didn't do this good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not independent enough. Guess what that does to your self-esteem? Self-esteem goes down, depressive symptoms go up. Another theory is called cognitive theory, and this looks at depressive mindsets, distorted or maladaptive cognitive structures, negative views of yourself, your future, the world, and poor problem-solving ability. So cognition goes, look, you've got I don't want to say messed up mindset, but the way that you view the world, yourself, and your future makes it harder for you to do anything. If you think you're a loser, you're not going to apply for a job. If you don't apply for a job, you're not making money. If you're not making money, how can you go out and go to a restaurant every once in a while? How can you go to martial arts class? How can you go out and spend some money for a coffee? How can you buy new clothes? So we have these thoughts that make us withdraw from engaging in society, from working out, from going out, from engaging in romantic relationships, which will lead to feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness, which will physiologically make you feel fatigued and sad and increase those depressive symptoms. The last theory we want to talk about is neurobiological. So this is looking at things like neurochemical and receptor abnormalities, neurophysiological abnormalities, neuroendocrine abnormalities, genetic variants, abnormalities in the brain structure and function. So this stuff is really, really heavy in the neurobiological component. This is for some reason, let's say, when something happens that should make a normal person happy, your brain doesn't release dopamine, which is associated with goals, like goal setting or exceeding expectations, which make you feel good. Think about playing a video game. Think about doing a drug. Think about getting the high. Or your brain doesn't release the amount of serotonin necessary to make you feel good. Why? So in the I Feel Hopeless video, I talked about this kind of cognitive triad before, right? This idea of how if you think negatively about yourself, I'm a loser. If you think negatively about the future, negatively about the world, you're not going to want to do much, right? Because you go, the world sucks, so why even try? So what causes depression? It can be a variety of things. Again, going back to one of it can be the genetic components. A huge one is family experiences, so growing up in an abusive environment. Life stress, someone close to you passes away or something happens, you get fired from a job, you're financially in a bad place. And obviously your core beliefs about all those things, about life, about yourself, about other people. So there are an extreme amount of causes as to why someone could experience depression. So, somewhat good news is that there are treatments for depression. And there are many different kinds of treatments. The one that I want to talk to you today is about medication and about CBT. So CBT is the most common and effective form of psychosocial intervention. It combines elements of behavioral and cognitive therapies in an integrated approach. So it's about challenging the beliefs that you have about yourself, about your future, about the world. And if we can challenge your beliefs, it will change the way you feel. And if you start to feel better, you'll have more energy, and then you can go out and do things. You can go out and get a job, start making some money, use that money, go out and treat yourself to a cup of coffee, buy yourself a gift. That makes you feel better. You feel better, you want to go to work more. Why? You want to make more money. You want to go engage in these pleasures. So that's a big one. The second, or I shouldn't say second, the also very common treatment for depression is medication. So medication, we're going to look at treats mood disturbances and other depressive symptoms using antidepressants. The most common form is SSRIs, which stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So when you think about treatment for depression, one of the most common ones I want you to think about are CBT and medication. Some more specific SSRIs for you to do your own research. One is called Prozac. One is called Zoloft. That's Zoloft. Another one is called Celexa. Celexa. And finally, one of the more common ones, Lexapro. Lexa and then Pro. Pro. So these are all different forms of medication in relation to SSRIs. Now, here's again what's really sad is I can't tell you all this stuff works. What I can tell you is some studies suggest moderate benefits with use. Like, thanks, way to make me feel confident about treatment of depression. Does that mean we shouldn't get it treated because who cares? Not at all. There is a chance it'll get better, but unfortunately, we can't confidently say. For example, you have a headache, take a Tylenol. The chances of a Tylenol making you feel a lot better are a lot higher than you going to counseling and getting medication and getting treatment. And that's not because counseling doesn't work, it's because we're still figuring it out. There's still parts of the brain that we do not understand. There are constantly new studies being run to figure out how can we best serve you, how can we best help the individual, what is the most appropriate treatment necessary for a person to start feeling better. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is bipolar disorder. So remember earlier I said we have this branch. We've got mood disorders at the top. The bottom left here, we've got depressive disorders. I named the three. On the right, we're going to have bipolar disorder. Now, bipolar disorder is very uncommon. You should note that. And the big thing that differs bipolar disorder from depressive disorder is this difference in mood. So one moment, maybe you're sad, you're fatigued, you're angry, irritable. This other moment, you're extremely energized and you're talking super fast and you're thinking like 1,000,000 miles per hour. If I read this for you, youth with bipolar show periods of abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive, and or irritable mood. They may display symptoms such as an inflated self-esteem, a decreased need for speech, pressured speech, flight of ideas, distractibility, and reckless behavior. So the difference really between depressive disorders and bipolar disorder is that depressive disorders, it's kind of like your one mood. And I feel terrible and tired and sluggish and irritable. Bipolar disorder is you feel tired, sluggish, and irritable, and all of a sudden, your mood just rises, and you don't want to sleep, and you're talking really fast, and you feel very energized, and you're ready to take on the world, and your mood just keeps bouncing up and down. So the causes of bipolar disorder are even less than depressive disorders. And as always, we have studies right now going on looking at things like gene, neurobiology, looking at things like family, upbringing, abusive families. And the treatment for bipolar right now in young people requires a multi-model treatment plan with education of the patient and the family about the illness, medication, and psychosocial interventions to address the youth's symptoms and related psychosocial impairments. That's a fancy way of saying, look, we've got to look at the whole picture. We've got to look at your family environment. We've got to look at your beliefs about yourself. We've got to look at your nutrition. And we've got to figure out what can we do? What can we start to attack and to target that can increase your mood and therefore increase your life satisfaction, while decreasing the bipolar disorder symptoms, right? And one of the big ones is medication. There's a gentleman by the name of Kanye West, now known as Ye, and he publicly came out and said, when they put me on medication for bipolar, it made me feel less creative. It made me feel tired. It made me feel sluggish. I didn't feel anything. Like I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel joy. It was just nothing, neutral. I felt empty. So you can understand when people take this medication and it makes them feel nothing. It makes them feel, he actually went on the record saying it makes them feel less creative, which is something that we hear often as well. So we recognize that there is no perfect solution. Folks, I know this was a lot I put on you, and originally I was going to make this into 2 videos, but I thought, you know what? You're a smart, mature person. You can just press pause, take a break whenever you need to, and then come back to this video. I understand it was very intense. There was a lot of information here. Again, the purpose here was just breadth. I just want to give you a taste test of these different answers and these different topics so you can get a better understanding of how they function and how they relate to one another. Studies are still going on. We're still trying to better understand things like depression, still trying to better understand things like bipolar and mood disorders in general. And I'm very confident to say that as the years progress, as we dedicate more time to this research, our treatments will get better, our prevention will get better, And hopefully, and I feel pretty optimistically, that the percentage of recovery from treatments will increase drastically in the future. Now, what the future exactly means, I don't know. But we're going to have patience, and the only thing we can do is to become more aware and more understanding. So when someone says, like, I'm feeling really tired, like I might be depressed, in your head you're going, yeah, you're probably experiencing a depressive symptom. If it's several, if it's abnormal, if it's going on for about 2 weeks nonstop, that individual might at the very least do a Google search. Hey, what is major depressive disorder? What if I think I have depression? Can I speak to a professional? Like, can I just consult them? Like, hey, what do you think? Because I don't want to self-diagnose myself. I don't want to have a false positive. It's thinking I am depressed when I'm not actually. We want you to be as happy and healthy as possible. And the goal, in my opinion, the first step for the layperson is education. Once we can educate ourselves, we can hopefully have a happier and healthier life moving forward. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I appreciate you for sticking with me. Please take care of yourselves and take care of your health. I wish you an abundance of resilience.